In 1995, the Broadcast Satellaview was released as an add-on for the Super Famicom, which allowed players to download and play games and access other media through a satellite subscription channel provided by St. Giga. Live voiceovers and CD quality music were provided during these broadcasts. The most unique feature was that the channel's content was accessible and playable only during specific dates and time slots. It's basically the video game version of live television. Probably the most well-known title released for this add-on is BS Zelda no Densetsu, which is a spin-off of the Legend of Zelda for the NES. Instead of being presented as a complete game upon release, it was divided into 4 episodes, with each one providing additional material. The first broadcast aired on August 6, 1995, with the next 3 broadcasts taking place 1 week after one another. A second map was available for play on December 30th, 1995, with additional episodes released through January 5th, 1996. Here is a chart from the BS Zelda Legends website, which shows the original broadcast dates and reruns for each map and episode. Attempts at emulation have been a challenge given the limited time frame that this game was available for play, the gameplay format, and the audio features of the original broadcasts. A group called MottZilla emulated a version that attempts to mimic the original broadcast from maps 1 and 2. Their version was made available on a Super Nintendo cartridge, which I purchased at a gaming expo several years ago. The information for this game is based on the original broadcast and the MottZilla project version. The 16-bit treatment results in additional graphical details and animations, such as grass in the forest, ripples in the sand, and waves in the oceans for the overworld. In the underworld labyrinths, there are cracks and moss along the walls, and bubbling lava and waving water in the streams. With the extra buttons on the Super Nintendo controller, you can switch between your consumable inventory items with the L and R buttons, removing the hassle of consistently bringing up the inventory screen. The MottZilla version replicates the menu from the original Zelda, where you can select, delete, or start a new save file. In addition, there's a Help Me option which provides special in-game instructions, which I'll talk about later. For this version, when you start a new game, you can choose from 3 character sprites, a boy, a girl, or Link, and select which map to play. Your adventure begins by automatically entering the cave to pick up the sword. In the original broadcast, you had 50 minutes to complete each episode. That applies to this version as well. The clock runs in real time, so if you pause the game, it continues to run. At certain times during each episode, an event occurs. In the original broadcast, a message would appear on screen instructing the player to listen for hints and information provided by the narrator. This includes status effects applied to Link, such as infinite bombs, shooting beams from your sword regardless of how much health Link has, shop items are sold at half price, the use of a mighty boomerang which damages larger enemies, your heart containers are maxed out to 16, and more. These effects last for a few minutes before wearing off, which is indicated by an alarm. Other occurrences include all on-screen enemies are zapped or frozen, or a fairy appears. Finally, certain objects are obtainable or entrances to dungeons are accessible. The on-screen text and the human voice narrator are not in this version, so you'll need to consult the guide to figure out when certain events happen. The overworld map is condensed to an 8x8 grid, down from the 8x16 grid in the NES Zelda. The locations are based on the original Zelda map, but the lower screen count results in a severe reduction and even elimination of sections of Hyrule, such as the graveyard, which has just one screen, the lake, the eastern forest, and desert. Many of the remaining screens are identical to its 8-bit counterpart, like the Lost Woods, the top of the waterfall, and Spectacle Rock and Death Mountain. The locations of some shops and special items differ from the NES Zelda. The locations of the first 4 dungeons are highlighted on the map, but this applies only to Map 1. Most of the screens for the Map 2 Overworld were altered from Map 1. You will come across areas that are impassable. For example, in the first episode, there's a stream west of the cave that has bushes surrounding the area across the bridge. Normally you would use a candle to burn those bushes, but no shops carry any in the explorable area. You might think there's no way to get through. In the original broadcast, you would have to let the session expire and wait a week for the next episode in which a candle would be available for purchase. In this version, you can speed up the clock by entering the command you see in the inventory screen. This ends the session for that episode. When you load your game, you begin at the next episode. You can save your progress within an episode by entering this command in the inventory screen. There are additional barriers set up for each episode, preventing you from fully exploring Hyrule until the final episode. Each broadcast allowed access to 2 dungeons. Don't skip time ahead until both dungeons for that episode are completed, or else you'll have the same 15-minute time limit for the next episode to complete all unfinished dungeons. If time expires in a final episode, you will get a bad ending, which scared me the first time I saw it because it happened while I was playing late at night. The number of underworld labyrinths has been reduced from 9 to 8. Unlike the Overworld, the dungeon layouts and rooms greatly differ from the NES Zelda. One similar trait is that the dungeon maps are shaped to resemble objects or letters. In Map 1, the first 6 dungeons spell out St. Giga, with the last 2 resembling a skull and arrow. In Map 2, the 8 dungeons spell out Nintendo. Once again, some dungeons have rooms that are not on the map, some of which contain major items. The magical key is the only item that is not to be found in the labyrinths, which is not a big deal since the dungeons are designed for you to have enough keys in stock. I find these dungeons less complicated to navigate compared to the original game. All overworld enemies such as Octoroks, Levers, Peahats, Moblins, and Lynels are accounted for. Their placement within the overworld is consistent with the original game. For example, Octoroks and Levers are scattered along the shore, Moblins roam through the Lost Woods, and Lynels protect the area around Death Mountain. There are 2 enemies missing from the underworld labyrinths, the Centipede Lanmola and Gleeok the multi-headed dragon. In the original Zelda, Lanmolas were exclusive to level 9 in both quests. Patra, the flying eyeball monster, also exclusive to level 9, appears in several boss fights in this game, essentially replacing Gleeok. Pole's voice can be defeated with the flute, which harkens to their sensitivity to loud noises, which did not apply to the North American NES version despite being mentioned in the instruction manual. Late in the game, you will fight stronger versions of Aquamentus and Manhanla. Aquamentus takes more hits to defeat and emits additional projectiles as his color changes. Manhanla regenerates his claws if you take too long to defeat him. In addition to the status effects I mentioned earlier, there are other factors that makes your journey less hectic than the NES Zelda. Items dropped by defeated enemies such as rupees, hearts, bombs, and fairies appear more frequently. I'm sure this was implemented so that you don't spend too much time grinding for items given the time limit to complete each episode. The number of rupees you can carry exceeds the 255 limit in the original game, allowing for a count over 1,000. Fairies appear if you strike certain objects such as rocks, bushes, or tombstones with your boomerang. Between both worlds, the quantity of monsters you fight in some screens are fewer, which is a sigh of relief when it comes to dealing with the tougher foes such as the Wizzrobes or Darknuts. The trade-off is that if you defeat all enemies in a single screen and then leave and immediately return, the enemies will reappear, which wasn't the case in the original Zelda with few exceptions. Some enemies inflict less damage. Clues given by the old man are more straightforward based on the English translations. I first stumbled upon BS Zelda no Densetsu years ago on emulation, not knowing how to progress in the game. It wasn't until I bought the cartridge that I learned how progression worked. The time limits might be a turnoff for some, as players won't be able to enjoy this game at a leisurely pace. The smaller overworlds, less confusing dungeons, and more direct clues make up for that. There are other emulated versions that remove the time limits. The MottZilla version should have included text hints for some events to eliminate the need for online guides, as I got stuck on a few occasions early on. As a huge fan of the NES Zelda, I get my enjoyment from the 16-bit iteration as it captures the elements of what made the original enjoyable, such as exploration, the variety of enemies, and the wide array of inventory items, with the latter being much easier to manage. The different arrangements for the overworlds of Maps 1 and 2 boost the replay value. While you don't get the CD music from the original broadcast, the redone tracks are well done, which have that A Link to the Past influence. I've played through this version many times, and though it doesn't triumph over A Link to the Past, I say that you should give this version a try. We will close out the video with side-by-side gameplay of BS Zelda no Densetsu and The Legend of Zelda. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.
Bye.